other than I tell him what's in the news about it.
And what's his reaction? What does he say?
Go tell him that I need a pardon. Go tell him I deserve a pardon. That's what he said.
That's Diddy's lead defense attorney giving the exclusive to CBS Mornings. And get this, while Diddy faces a possible 20-year sentence, is he still planning a music comeback?
He said, well, he's going to be back in Madison Square Garden.
Doing what?
I guess being on stage.
Diddy sat in the courtroom staring straight ahead, struggling to hold himself together as his world collapsed in real time. The same man who once commanded stages, threw the most exclusive parties, and built an empire of music, fashion, and power was now reduced to a defendant awaiting judgment. For years, he had lived like a king, untouchable, insulated by wealth and influence, convinced nothing could ever bring him down.
Not guilty. Sex trafficking of Jane, not guilty. Transportation to engage in prostitution, Cassie, guilty. Transportation to engage in prostitution, Jane, guilty. That was the historic verdict out of the Sean Diddy Combs criminal court today. A split verdict after almost 13 hours of deliberations and weeks of testimony and evidence and arguments. The 12 jurors acquitted Sean Combs of the more severe charges, the ones that carried the stiffest prison sentence, potentially 15 years to life in prison, but convicted him of the Mann Act charges, which, by the way, carry up to 10 years in prison each, although I will tell you in a filing today from the government, it appears the sentencing range they're looking for is 51 to 63 months, so 4 to 5 years. However, there is no mandatory minimum. So would the judge go lower? We'll talk about what the defense is asking for too. And also, whatever the sentences are, would he combine the sentences consecutively, one after another? Maybe, maybe not. A lot of questions, but I'll tell you what, you would think that the verdict would be just the only big part of today. You would think that's the only major decision. Not the case, because we got to talk about what happened later on in the day, the bail hearing. Right after the verdict, it was a question of should Sean Combs be granted release while awaiting sentencing, which the judge set today, by the way, sort of set the sentencing date. I'll talk more about that as well. But let's talk about Sean Combs. He's been locked up since September 2024. He's been denied bail at each turn. There was a change of circumstances here. He had just been acquitted of 3 of the charges. So could he make bail? We're going to talk about it. All right, so to discuss the hearing and more, let me bring on once again, hopefully not for the last time, but we're at basically the end of this case until sentencing, joined once again by long Crimes in Court reporter Elizabeth Milner. Great to see you. First of all, your reaction to the verdict. Is this what you expected? Because let's really briefly explain what happened yesterday that, we thought it kind of gave us a preview into what would happen today. Not necessarily so.
Yeah, I was not going to lie, Jesse, a little surprised by the verdicts in that I really kind of thought there was a really strong case for count 2, that obviously being sex trafficking as it relates to Cassie Ventura. And that was only because of the questions that the jury was asking when they were bringing some notes back. And that was kind of in relation to what had happened at specific instances that the government point out were allegations of sex trafficking. So I thought because of the tone that was inside the courtroom, the way the family was getting a little bit emotional sitting inside the gallery, even Diddy's demeanor, for the most part, we've seen him kind of really keep up his spirits. But yesterday was really a time where we kind of saw, I think, the weight weighing in on him, that it's possible a conviction on some of the more serious charges were going to happen. And so when the jury came back not guilty on count 1, 2, and 4, I was a little surprised, especially to count 2, but, I do respect the jury's decision. They spent a lot of time listening to this case, listening to all the testimony, listening to all the evidence, and that was the verdict that they had rendered.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised that they found him guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. We have been saying since for weeks on this show that felt like a straightforward path to conviction. Wasn't surprised not guilty with Jane, given some of the gray areas of her testimony, but also the jury didn't even ask for one readback of her testimony or anything to do with her testimony, so it made me think.
Diddy sat in the courtroom staring straight ahead, fighting to hold himself together as his world collapsed in real time. The same man who once commanded stages, threw the most exclusive parties, and built an empire spanning music, fashion, and power was now reduced to a defendant waiting for judgment. For years, he had lived like a king, untouchable, insulated by money and influence, convinced nothing could ever bring him down. And yet, here he was, stripped of it all, bracing for the words that would change his life forever. The air felt suffocating, the silence unbearable, and everyone in the room knew what was about to happen would echo far beyond the courthouse walls. Then the judge spoke, the word cutting through the stillness like a blade. Guilty. That alone shook the room. But it didn't end there. The sentence followed, long and unflinching, crushing whatever hope Diddy still clung to. This wasn't a slap on the wrist. This wasn't a fine or a symbolic punishment. This was prison, real time, the kind that doesn't just damage a career but erases it, wiping away decades of power, reputation, and wealth in a single breath. And that was when he broke. His composure shattered, his eyes filled, his body trembled, and a raw outburst escaped him. The cry of a man who never believed this day could come. This was supposed to be impossible. He had been in the game too long, had too many connections, too much money, too much control, or so he thought.
I was surprised about Cassie Ventura sex trafficking just because, like you said, the readback of that testimony, and then shortly thereafter, they came back yesterday and said, we have a verdict on that charge. So I thought, they're convinced. And when it came to racketeering, I thought they were still going to be hung because they said they were at an impasse yesterday. It seemed like based on their note, there was no way that would change. The judge told them to continue deliberating. They come back today, and like in an hour, they come back not guilty on racketeering. I'm not really sure what that split ultimately will be. Maybe the jurors will speak out and we'll hear. Got to ask you about Diddy's reaction. Okay, so we have courtroom sketches of what it looked like. You were in there. What was his reaction to the verdict?
Oh, he was very pleased with the verdict. Obviously, I think for the defense and the defendant, that being Sean Combs, I think obviously they would have wanted an acquittal on all the charges. But I think given that they weren't a conviction on the more serious charges of RICO conspiracy and sex trafficking as it relates to Cassie in one charge and Jane in another charge, I think overall Combs was very, very pleased with the jury to the point where I saw him kind of mouth a little thank you to the jurors as they were still sitting kind of in the jury box, as they were kind of leaving for the end of their day. Obviously, we still have some more matters to address for our end. But in terms of just his reaction, even his family's reaction, Jesse, I think they were so happy knowing that there's such a strong possibility that their father will come home. Obviously, if he would have been convicted on the more serious charges, that might have been a different discussion. But given that he was only convicted on count 3 and 5, that being the Mann Act, it seems like given that it comes with a lesser penalty and sentencing, I think the family is like, yes, our father is coming home, our loved one is coming home, and we hope to see him very, very soon.
And talk about a reaction. Outside that courthouse, my gosh, what has been going on out there? There's verbal disputes, people spraying things. Just give us a brief summary of what you've witnessed outside that courthouse after the verdict.
I've witnessed a lot, Jesse. A lot was going on. It was kind of, I will even say, pandemonium after the verdict was read. And outside, a lot of Diddy supporters, a lot of people who are kind of with the Free Diddy, I wouldn't say movement, but I guess, they believed in his innocence. They were very pleased, even thinking that it was a possibility he just walked outside of that courthouse at some point. But it was a lot of commotion. I did see some people getting to some heated debates, especially in relation to Cassie. I saw some people getting very upset because they believed that the government was trying to take a good man down who did a lot for the culture. Those types of conversations were being had from a lot of people in the public. I even saw some kind of weirder things, and that being people squirting baby oil on themselves. And one of the reporters even got some on her shirt by one of the people who were kind of over in that area. And so a lot was going on to the point that I think the courthouse police were just kind of like, okay, we need everybody to calm down. They have barricades going all the way down the street. I think in the event that Sean Combs would have walked out of that courthouse, it would have just been straight chaos, I think, outside. But for the most part, especially with that not happening around that time frame, that a lot of people, especially his supporters, were very pleased. And obviously for some, they were a little disappointed with the verdict, but for most that we could see here at the courthouse, a lot seemed pleased by
Diddy sat frozen in the courtroom, staring straight ahead as his world collapsed in real time. The man who once ruled stages, threw legendary parties, and built an empire of music, fashion, and power was now just another defendant awaiting judgment. The air was thick, the silence suffocating, and when the judge spoke, guilty, everything shattered. The sentence that followed was brutal, final and unmistakable. Real prison time. Not a fine, not a warning, but the kind of punishment that erases decades of influence in a single moment. His composure broke, eyes filling, body trembling, as panic replaced power. The mask fell away. The king was gone, leaving only a broken man facing a future of cold walls, locked doors, and a world where his name no longer protected him.
Was the defense's argument, hey, all the people who testified against Sean Combs were not being truthful, or were taking their accounts, were listening to their accounts, and what they're saying just didn't amount to a federal crime? Is it a mixture of both? Just trying to understand what the argument was.
I mean, I think it was a mixture. It depended on the witness, and a lot of the witnesses were telling the truth, but the truth didn't hurt Sean. It helped him. There were some people who were shading the truth. The great thing about it was there was a ton of evidence in written communications that people had created at the time, all these text messages. There were videos, and that really helped us expose the truth because these were things that had been recorded this is what people were, the girlfriends, others were saying to Sean at the time of the events in question. And so, there was really no way for the witnesses or the government to hide what was in the written documents.
Now, I will tell you, if you had been following what we've been doing here on Sidebar Law and Crime, we call balls and strikes. So there were, during the course of the trial, we would say, this was the strength of the prosecution, this was the strength of the defense. There was such effective cross-examination of these key witnesses that we all kind of wondered, was the defense going to call any witnesses? And you really did. And what was that decision? Because I understand there were witnesses who were planning to be called. There was an idea to put forward a defense case. There was a choice not to do that. Can you talk to us a little bit more about what that strategy was about?
Sure. I mean, you always have to be ready to put on a case. At the end of the day, what it comes down to at the end of the government's case is how well do you feel it went in for us? And it's always risky to put on a defense case. People don't realize that, but there's always two sides to everything. And if you put on a witness, and even if it's, 70% good, if the prosecution scores some points, it can really undermine you. And so if you feel like the government's case has gone in really well for you, it can be actually riskier to call any witnesses. People don't necessarily realize that, but at the end of the day, we just made a decision that we thought the case had come in well, and we didn't want to, sort of change the dynamic in a way that could be risky for us.
Was Christina Courtroom ever potentially going to be called by the defense? We were all shocked why the government never chose to call her, since, her name came up almost every single day through almost every witness. Was there a plan by the defense to call her?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to get into specific
I had to
plans
ask.
or non-plans, but it was more of an overall decision just not to put anyone on and just to use a few pieces of evidence that hadn't come in.
What do you think about the prosecution's choice not to call her? Because I will tell you, we did lunchtime shows, live shows with our audience. I would say 80% of the questions that we got during 7 weeks of testimony was, why is she not being called and will she be called? Were you surprised the prosecution chose not to call who was supposed to be the main alleged co-conspirator?
I mean, I don't think so. I think that she would have been a double-edged sword for them, and they probably didn't want to take the risk. As you saw during the trial, even a number of the witnesses that they had always planned to call that they did put in kind of blew up in their faces or had positive things to say about Sean that maybe they weren't anticipating. And so it would have been pretty risky for them to put Christina Courtroom on the stand, I think.
There was so...
His cries weren't just about the years he would spend behind bars. They were about fear, humiliation, and total collapse. The man who once ruled rooms with ease now looked fragile and terrified, stripped of every shield he believed he had. As his lawyer tried to steady him and his team closed in, it was clear nothing could stop what was coming. The judge's words were final, the sentence real, and the shock rippled far beyond the courtroom. Across social media, through resurfaced interviews and old rumors that no longer felt like whispers, but like a reckoning finally arrived.
That it's often successful for the purpose of correcting when there's a clerical error in the sentence. Now, assuming Combs has valid legal grounds to support any of this, I imagine he will file whatever motion he can for relief from either the verdict or the sentence. Then again, I don't know. He got a very favorable ruling. Obviously, he was convicted. He's not entirely happy with it, and his defense counsel explained that. But they also, in their press conference after the verdict, they were jubilant. They were ecstatic, and I wonder if he gets a favorable sentence, is he even going to challenge this? I mean, they seem happy.
Yeah, they seem ecstatic because the emotions that kind of ran outside of the courtroom, it was kind of double that inside the courtroom where all the defense attorneys were hugging, they were crying. So seeing them outside in the press conference, all kind of holding hands, going up, that was just a little slice of the cake from what we all saw inside that federal courtroom. But I think it can kind of go both ways, and that's mainly because Sean Combs is still behind bars right now. The judge didn't grant him bail even after the verdict, and I think his reasoning might give us a little kind of picture into what the sentencing might possibly look like, because the judge even pointed out during his denying of Diddy's bail after his conviction, which were on counts 3 and 5, kind of talking back to what had happened in June of 2024 with Jane and the violent altercation that happened over at Jane's apartment. And so I'm thinking if the judge is already kind of on his mind about the whole domestic violence aspect and the physical violence that was exuded from the defendant, even just last year, I think it's possible maybe the judge, even if he hears from the family, even if he hears from Sean Combs' friends, that it's possible it might be kind of a little bit of a tougher sentence than maybe the defense was expecting.
Well, look, I think the defense might be wanting to take advantage of this, right? Now, the judge said, even though I'm denying bail and I'm looking at the violence factor, it's not a preview of what I'm going to do for sentencing. But I think this is the opportunity for the defense to submit any kind of mitigating factors and have the probation officer speak to his friends and family and talk about the impact of this. I mean, we just interviewed Charlucci the other day. So I wonder if they're saying, you know what? They said to Sean Combs, listen, let's wait for October. Gives us more time to present our case to Judge Arun Subramanian. And then we had the hearing today. This monumental hearing.
Great.
You've been in court for 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day.
Yeah.
This was what, like 7 seconds?
I think maybe even less than, I would say
What
kind
happened?
of close to 5. So get all the way down to the courthouse. I'm like seeing everybody
Which
from
is not
the trial.
close from here. so
No,
people know.
it's not. It's not. And it was hot outside too. So
all the way downtown,
walking all the way down, or not, I didn't walk all the way downtown. From the subway to the walk to the courthouse.
Okay.
Get there, check in all my stuff. I would say the security check-in was longer than the actual hearing.
Okay.
So it was a remote hearing. We didn't see Sean Combs in person. We didn't see any of the attorneys on both sides. We didn't even see the judge. And so what had happened was we get inside kind of the overflow room.
Oh, the overflow room.
Mhm,
Okay.
Yep. So we get inside the overflow room. There's a big giant screen. It's completely black, but then you hear Sean Combs' voice being like, Mark, are you there? And so it was kind of like one of those dial-in type of hearings. And so we heard Mark Agnifilo's voice. Then all of a sudden we hear the prosecution's voice. It was Christy Slavic. She was accompanied by Emily Johnson, both who work on behalf of the government. And then all of a sudden, Mark Agnifilo was kind of like, you know what, we were able to work everything out as far as our sentencing date goes. And then the judge's clerk is like, oh, okay, so both parties agree. And then this matter is adjourned.
And that was it. I worried that's what was going to be because when they had the letter basically working out the date, I was like, oh, what are they going to talk about? And then after that hearing is when they switched it back to October 3rd.
Yeah.
So not much there. You didn't see Sean Combs. Okay. Let's talk about some other things that have been going on. First of all, big news. There's a new lawsuit that came out against Sean Combs, okay? This is pretty disgusting. You have this unidentified John Doe who claims that in September of...
Former allies moved fast to distance themselves, acting as if they'd never known him, while rivals watched the downfall with quiet satisfaction, and even his fans were split. Some insisting he didn't deserve this, others saying it was long overdue. For the first time in his career, Diddy wasn't controlling the narrative. He wasn't spinning the story. He was the story, and it was the darkest chapter of his life. The brutality of it lay in the symbolism. A man who sold himself as untouchable, larger than life, capable of bending the industry to his will. The party king, the mogul, the trendsetter, reduced to nothing in a courtroom where fame offered no shield, money bought no escape, and status meant nothing. Only facts, evidence, and truth mattered, and that truth sent him to prison. This wasn't just one man falling. It was a legacy collapsing. For decades, Diddy embodied power, wealth, and dominance in music and culture, carefully crafting an iconic image, now shattered beyond repair. And no matter what happens next, history will remember this moment, and the man who cried when the empire finally fell.
never turned over. But the more interesting argument is that all these counts were charged. The only thing he was convicted of were the Mann Acts, and he probably wouldn't have been convicted of these Mann Acts but for all this other stuff that came in to try and prove these counts that they could not prove and did not have a basis for bringing.
Let me just challenge you on that, because this is a jury who didn't find that there was sex trafficking, and I can't confirm that they found him guilty of the Mann Act because of the hotel video or anything else. I mean, it seems to me that they might have convicted him on that based on the travel records, the payment receipts, all about that, not even necessarily allegations of violence. I mean, do you think that it was because of, let's say, the Intercontinental Hotel video that he was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution? It always felt to me that they proved that charge based purely on, the documents.
Well, I always feel like during a trial, whenever you get a guilty verdict on one of the counts or two of the counts out of 6 or 7, you think to yourself, is it because of these other things that they brought up, how bad he is, he's not a good guy, the video came out? Sometimes juries will split the baby, meaning, there's people that want to convict, there's people that don't want to convict, and they're like, okay, let's convict them on these acts. We can all agree we can convict him on these acts. He's not a good guy. He transported these men across state lines. Let's convict him on this. There's always going to be a question of that. The only way to not have a question of that, obviously, is when the jury comes out, someone gives an interview and says, hey, this is why we did it, is because, this tape was so bad and these other incidents were so bad that we were like, we can't just let him walk with nothing. So we convicted him on the Mann Acts. Now, we don't have a juror saying that. Do I think eventually jurors are going to start coming out? Yeah, I think so. I think some of these jurors are going to come out. They're going to want to do some interviews, not before sentencing. And I think after sentencing, I think some of them will come out and we'll discuss it, because I think that was the feeling I was getting from this jury and the reactions they had to Comey's closing, and even the reaction just in general to the 5 or the 6 U.S. attorney team. I think their reactions in general were very noticeable. And I think that this is a jury that wants to talk to people once I think he gets sentenced.
Okay, so now let's move on to the pardon discussion. So if he can't get relief from the court in getting the conviction thrown out or a new trial, can he get relief through a pardon? Before we talk about, is this a real thing, what is the process to even obtain a federal pardon? How do you even go about that?
Sure. So it's a pardon or a commutation. If someone is actually in custody, they could also get a commutation, which does not wipe the crime off your record. It just allows you to get out of jail. So he has that option to give him a commutation. If he gets sentenced, he can also give him a commutation. But as for the process, there's an application on the DOJ website, and I'm part of some charities that also do a lot of pro bono work for pardons and commutations. You can fill out this form, DOJ website. It essentially lists the reasons why you should get a pardon, what kind of community service you've done, things of that nature. There's a separate application for a commutation, but you can file a pardon application, and you can also say, hey, listen, if it's not a pardon, I'm looking for a commutation. You attach your indictment, you add reasons why you...
In disbelief, he cried out as the judge sentenced him to years behind bars, and that sound said everything, not just shock, but regret, fear, and the realization that every move, every decision, every secret had finally come back to him. That cry marked the exact moment the untouchable was touched, the powerful stripped bare before the world. The courtroom erupted, gasps, whispers, reporters racing to capture every word. But in that instant, Diddy was no longer a mogul or a billionaire king of excess. He was just a man crushed by the weight of his own actions. The irony was impossible to miss. The signs had been there all along. The lawsuits, the testimonies, the whispers growing louder each year, and when the verdict came down, it felt less like a surprise and more like the inevitable end of a story that had been unraveling in plain sight.
The probation department can make a recommendation, but the DA will certainly have more ability, most of the time, to talk a judge in or out of a sentencing recommendation from the probation department. Federal court is different. They really put a lot of weight on those. So that's something that I think is going to be very interesting. And a lot of that will come down to what the individuals involved in that investigation, even though it shouldn't impact their professional recommendation. It's really, I think we're going to see what they thought of the case. Did they think he got away with something horrific here? Did they think that he was getting railroaded from the beginning? I think that may reflect in the recommendation to the court, but of course we don't know what that is yet. I don't know. If I'm his defense lawyer, I'm kind of I don't know if I am pressing the gas on that, trying to make this thing go faster. I mean, it's coming up soon enough anyway. I would want to give them the time and not press them, because you don't want a probation officer or anybody in the federal system to feel like they're being rushed.
Right.
Because I think it's very easy to just go, okay,
Yeah.
screw it, the guy should stay in.
The prosecution made the point yesterday. They said the point, like, we're not ready to give a really sentencing recommendation. We haven't gotten the report. There's people say, well, maybe he'll get time served, right? He's been locked up. There's other people say, no, the judge is going to throw the book at him, even though the judge said yesterday, even though I'm denying him bail and I'm looking at certain conditions, this is not reflective or a preview of what my sentencing recommendation or what my sentence will be. But, are we looking at double digits? Are we looking, you think, at 1 to 5 years time served? I know it's so impossible to ask, but it is a very specific charges he was convicted of.
Yeah, we're not looking at double digits.
Okay.
I cannot imagine the court imposing that. And remember, because this law is so old, and we're in an age of Uber, so literally somebody in New York City, a man or a woman who engages the services of a sex worker who lives in New Jersey, and if they pay for their Uber, that technically is a Mann Act violation. Okay, so it's a morality crime, and that it just does not carry the same weight.
Will the judge say, hey, listen, multiple instances he was doing it, not one Uber, he was doing it multiple times. You have 2 alleged victims here, Cassie, Jane, and violence, right? He used violence as one of the reasons to deny him bail. I wonder if he's going to look at, even though he was acquitted of racketeering and sex trafficking, different characteristics and components of his relationships with Jane and Cassie, and say, this is aggravated.
It's a very interesting question. Can the court aggravate nonviolent offenses that he was convicted of, which are the Mann Act violations? Can he aggravate those when he was acquitted of the more serious charges, essentially acquitted of everything that involved violence, threats, all of that sort of thing? So It's a very, very interesting legal question.
Real quick, asset forfeiture. What is that exactly? How would it work with Mann Act convictions?
I just don't see the feds being on very strong ground to seize a bunch of assets. And here's why, Jesse. Most of the federal cases where you have, especially RICO cases, an actual RICO case is an actual corrupt organization that the purpose is, like I had one in Salt Lake City last year. It was
In disbelief, Diddy broke down as the judge sentenced him to years behind bars, and that cry said everything: regret, fear, and the crushing realization that every move, every secret, had finally come back to claim its price. The courtroom erupted with gasps and frantic note-taking, but in that moment, he was no longer a mogul or untouchable billionaire, just a man stripped of power by the weight of his own actions. Many assumed the system might bend, that wealth and influence would soften the blow, but the judge didn't flinch, delivering a sentence that was long, cold, and final. As his team rushed to study him, it was clear this wasn't just a lost case. It was the collapse of everything: his freedom, his reputation, his empire, his carefully built image. What awaits him now is a world he's never known, where money offers limited protection, fame makes him a target, and control no longer exists. That's why his cries echoed so deeply, not just for the years ahead, but for the terrifying truth of what comes after, as the industry reels, allies fall silent, and the man who once ruled the narrative becomes its most tragic headline.
That contain allegations that were never discussed in any way in the criminal case.
Right.
But in the criminal case, was it ever alleged that he sexually assaulted men? Was it ever alleged that he grabbed men or forced them to do things? Or was it mostly focused upon women?
Seems like it was mostly focused on women, and that being the victims in this case. I think as far as just kind of the allegations towards men were really just having to do with the escorts or the entertainers, as they were also called in the criminal trial. But for the most part, it seemed like from what we heard in the criminal trial, which I know a lot of people are a little disappointed because they thought it would be a lot more, but really it was just kind of like just different isolated incidents involving two victims, being Jane and Cassie. But it seemed like there wasn't a lot of discussion about male victims in this trial, but there were little points that were brought up in terms of like the civil matters, those including like Bonna and her civil claim, Dawn Richard and her civil claim. I think even during the cross-examination of Cassie, one of the defense attorneys, that would be Anna Esteval, she had asked, was the baby oil laced? And I was thinking back to the civil claims, because a lot of civil claims had, a lot of civil suits had claimed that
it wasn't laced.
That it was, the civil suits claimed it was laced, but then in the criminal trial, Cassie had confirmed that the baby oil was never laced with any type of narcotics or anything like that.
By the way, Combs' legal team said in a statement to Page 6, quote, Mr. Combs' trial and acquittal on trafficking and RICO charges proves what we have been saying all along. Mr. Combs never sexually assaulted or trafficked anyone. That people continue to broadcast and file false accusations, no matter how heinous and uncorroborated, is unfortunate, but Mr. Combs will not back down. He will fight for as long as necessary to win his full vindication. I talked about on a previous sidebar how he might tackle all these lawsuits, maybe motions to dismiss, maybe try to say, these Jane and John Doe shouldn't proceed under pseudonyms. If you can convince a court of that, they may be reluctant to continue the case if they have to expose their identities. He might try to get rid of them at initial stages as much as possible.
And he was successful at that at the beginning, too.
Yeah, a few of them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about the jurors, okay? So first, a juror has spoken out since the verdict. Not surprising. We had a feeling this would happen. This unnamed juror apparently spoke to ABC and said that the public reaction to this decision, quote, is highly insulting and belittling to the jury and the deliberation process. We spent over 2 days deliberating. Our decision was based solely on the evidence presented and how the law is stated. We would have treated any defendant in the same manner regardless of who they are. I have nothing else to say. Now, you watch the jury, okay? And we'll talk about what an alternate juror had to say to you, but you watch the jury. You watch them day in and day out. What do you make of that statement?
I was a little surprised by
Really?
that statement, just a little bit, only because, and I shouldn't say anything surprising to me when it comes to this trial, I found that statement surprising only because we clearly had heard the same evidence. Obviously, they saw a little bit more than I saw being inside the gallery. Some of the exhibits we weren't able to see, that sort, and that included, the freak-off tapes, the hotel night tapes, all of that stuff. And so I was surprised by the jury's decision.
Diddy is now facing a reality he never prepared for. Prison doesn't care who you are, what you've done, or how many millions you've made. The parties, the champagne, the luxury cars, all gone. What's left is survival, and survival won't be easy when your name carries the kind of baggage his does. His cries in the courtroom weren't just desperation. They were a preview of the fear, danger, and loss of control he will face every single day behind bars. This isn't the end of a story, but it is the end of an era. The fall of Diddy is complete, the sentence sealed. He built his empire on the illusion of power, and in one courtroom hearing, that illusion shattered. The guilty verdict, the merciless sentence, the public breakdown. This moment will follow him forever. No amount of money, legal appeals, or PR spin can erase the image of Diddy crying as the judge delivered the words that ended his career, his freedom, and his reign. He thought he was untouchable, but now he knows nobody is.